Headlights washed the dock in hard white, and the water beyond it stayed black, unbroken, like the harbor swallowed light instead of reflecting it. It was October 18th, 2016, in Ketchikan, Alaska, and a float plane sat tied to a cleat at berth 7, like somebody left it there on purpose. The call came in as a minor harbor issue, the kind you clear in 10 minutes and forget by morning, so I walked down the planks alone with my collar up and my gloves damp from the steering wheel. Rain had been coming in sideways all evening, fine and cold, and everything near the water had that slick sheen that turns a simple step into a mistake. I was 31, behind on rent, and I'd taken the overtime because I didn't have the luxury of pride. Most people on shift called me Mason. The name on my badge was Mason Hart, Ketchikan Police Department, and I'd learned early that names mattered less than showing up when the radio told you to show up. Dispatch sent me to Tongass Basin at 11:17 p.m. for unsecured aircraft, possible abandoned, and the harbor officer, who usually handled dock problems, was tied up on a medical call across town. I drove down thinking it would be a drunk pilot who missed a ride, or a tourist who didn't understand how quickly weather eats a schedule up here. Ketchikan does that to you. Small problems show up wearing a serious face. My headlights hit the dock and the plane at the same time, and the float plane looked wrong even before I stepped out. The cabin door hung open like somebody left in a hurry, and the angle of it bothered me because it wasn't swinging in the wind. It was just sitting there, steady, like it had been placed. The engine cowling still felt warm when I brushed it with the back of my hand, which meant it hadn't been sitting for hours. The smell was fuel and wet upholstery, that sharp, sweet odor that clings to fabric when rain and gasoline mix, and it made the back of my throat tighten in a way I didn't like. I kept my flashlight low and my free hand near my holster, not because I expected a shootout on a dock, but because I'd learned that the moment you assume something is harmless is the moment it stops being harmless. A headset lay across the left seat, the ear cup twisted like it had been yanked off fast. The keys sat in the ignition, hanging on a thin strap, and that detail hit me harder than the open door. Pilots don't leave keys like that. Not in town, not in weather, not when theft and vandalism are as common as rain. It wasn't just careless, it looked staged. I keyed my radio. Dispatch Unit 12, I've got an unsecured aircraft at Tongass Basin, cabin door open, keys in ignition. I'm on scene, checking. Her voice came back, but it sounded torn up, like the air between us had turned thick. Copy Unit 12, say again your status. Your last broke up. Unsecured aircraft, I repeated, slower. I'm checking the cabin now. Stand by. I leaned into the float plane without climbing in, keeping my weight on the dock boards so I could back out fast. The overnight bag on the floor was unzipped, and the way it was positioned looked like someone had shoved it open with one hand, while the other hand was busy doing something else. The zipper teeth were wet, and inside I caught a glimpse of a folded rain jacket and a plastic water bottle lying on its side. The bottle had a dent in it, like it had been stepped on. When I backed out, my light dropped to the deck boards and found a thin drag mark cutting through the rainwater. It started near the passenger door and ran toward the old service road that climbed away from the marina and into the trees, past where the streetlight stopped. The streak wasn't deep enough to be a crate or a toolbox. It looked like something softer, heavier, pulling and catching, like cloth or a body bag, and I didn't want my mind to go there. In the smear there was a faint rusty color, not bright, not fresh-looking in the rain, but enough to make my stomach tighten. That was when my light bar flashed once. Just one burst of red and blue, reflected in puddles like a camera flash, then nothing. I hadn't touched the switch. My driver door was shut. The cruiser was behind me, angled where I'd parked it tight to the dock entrance, and for half a second, my brain tried to explain it away as a short or a bump. Then, the cold reality of it landed. Someone had to be close enough to my vehicle to touch the controls. I turned fast, flashlight and pistol coming up together, and I saw a figure near the rear quarter of my car. Not close enough for detail, close enough to be real. He was standing in that gap where the dock gear and stacked fenders made shadows, and the rain made his outline blur at the edges. I didn't shout like it was a movie. I used the voice I used on domestic calls when I needed people to listen. "Police," I said. "Show me your hands, right now." He moved sideways and slipped behind a stack of gear like he'd done it before. Then he ran, not stumbling, not panicking, just running clean and low, as if he already knew where every plank was slick. I went after him because leaving a runner in the dark near an open aircraft and a drag mark feels like choosing the wrong choice on purpose. My boots hit wet wood, my light cut ahead, and I tried not to outrun what I could see. He hit the service road, took the left bend into the trees, and the harbor light fell away fast. After 30 yards, it felt like he stepped through a door I couldn't find. I stopped because chasing blind in rain, alone, into timber, is how officers become a line in someone else's report. I backed toward the dock, scanning both sides, forcing my breathing down until I could hear what was around me. Water lapped against pilings. A chain clinked somewhere in the marina. Farther out, a boat horn moaned once, low and tired. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear brush moving. That silence was its own kind of noise. My radio crackled again, weak. Dispatch said my call sign like she was trying to hold on to it. I answered and asked for backup, and she told me units were tied up. Sergeant en route. I didn't like that, but it was honest. Ketchikan is small. On a wet night with 2 crashes and a medical call, you run out of bodies fast. I stayed put, but I didn't feel still. The float plane sat there with its door open like it wanted me to look deeper, like it was daring me to pretend it was nothing. I kept my light on the cabin, on the drag mark, on the service road, cycling through them in a pattern, because pattern keeps your head from drifting. And while I was doing that, a thought I didn't want came back anyway. 2 tourists had vanished that week. Not from the docks, not officially, but everyone heard it. A couple from the lower 48 didn't check out of their hotel. A rental car sat too long in a lot. People shrugged, then they started whispering. Sergeant Dana Leary arrived at 11:39 p.m. She parked tight behind my cruiser and stepped out with her collar up, rain beating on her eyelashes, eyes already on the float plane. Leary was the kind of supervisor who didn't waste words because words don't close cases. She walked the dock like she knew every board, stopped at the drag mark, and crouched without me asking. "Talk to me," she said. "Door open, keys in. Drag mark on the boards. I saw a male near my car. He ran up the service road into the trees." She looked up at me, face blank the way it gets when she's filing information into a clean stack. "You sure it wasn't a dock worker?" "He wasn't wearing reflective gear," I said, and he didn't answer. Leary nodded once and keyed her radio, then frowned when she had to repeat herself because dispatch couldn't hear her clean. "Dispatch, start me aircraft registration. Also check missing persons tied to the marina area in the past 2 weeks, and notify Alaska State Troopers, see if they can spare a body." A second set of headlights rolled in, and Trooper Noah Rask stepped out. Tall, quiet, rain on the brim of his hat, the kind of presence that makes you feel like the room got narrower. Rask didn't do small talk. He listened. Then he looked where you pointed, and he made decisions like he was moving pieces on a board. Leary didn't waste time. "Noah, unsecured plane, possible foul play, runner into the trees." Rask took one look at the float plane and then the woods. "That plane belongs to an air taxi," he said. "I saw it last week at the seaplane base." Dispatch came back with the registration. Leased to Rainline Air, a small outfit that did sightseeing hops and island drop-offs. Leary called the owner. She put the phone on speaker under her jacket to shield it from rain, and the tired man who answered sounded like he'd been half asleep and half worried for hours already. The pilot's name was Trent Mayfield, 34, reliable, supposed to be back at 8:30 p.m. Owner said he figured weather pushed him to Ward Cove or Hollis. Then Leary asked about passengers, and the pause on the line went too long. "He took 2 tourists out," the owner said. "Couple from Oregon, Evan Doyle and Rick Morrow. They were supposed to be back before dark." Leary's eyes met mine when she heard the names. 2 missing people already, and now a missing pilot. Rask asked if the aircraft had a tracker. The owner said yes, a small satellite unit in the tail, and he gave Rask the login while his voice got tighter with every sentence. Rask stepped under the dock roof, worked his phone until the signal held, and stared at the screen until it loaded. "Last ping," he said. "Gravina Island, near the old cannery site." Leary exhaled through her nose. That place has been dead for years. Everyone in town knew it. A big industrial shell left to rot. Broken windows, rusted frames. a place teenagers brag about but don't actually spend time in because the floors are sketchy and the silence makes your skin crawl. The kind of place where sound doesn't travel right. And now we had a missing pilot, 2 missing tourists, and a float plane sitting like bait at a dock. Harbor Master Celia Dunn met us at the small patrol boat right at midnight. She wore a flotation jacket and moved like she belonged on wet decks, steady on her feet in a way land people never are. When Leary said, "missing plane," Celia didn't ask questions. She just nodded like she already had a list of worst-case scenarios in her head. "You need a ride," she said. Leary told her what we needed: eyes, a way back, and her marine radio if our handhelds kept dropping. Celia untied and the boat slid out of the harbor, light smearing on black water like paint. The ride took 15 minutes, long enough for my mind to cycle through every bad option without landing on a good one. Rain hit my face in a fine spray, and the cold soaked into my hands through my gloves. I kept looking at the shoreline, at the dark mass of Gravina, and the thought kept returning. If someone wanted us there, we were doing exactly what they wanted. Gravina rose out of the dark like a low wall. The cannery buildings sat back from shore in big rectangular shapes that didn't reflect our light the way buildings should. The windows were broken and black. The roofline was uneven. Even from the water, it looked like the place had been abandoned by more than just workers. Celia cut the engine near a small dock, and the quiet after the motor died felt too big. We stepped onto wet boards again, but these boards flexed under our weight, old and tired. Leary gave the plan in 2 sentences because that's how she operated. We go in together. We don't split without a reason. We keep comms open. We moved up the gravel service road toward the main building. A chain-link gate hung open, and the padlock lay in the mud, bent like it had been crushed with tools. That detail mattered because it meant intent. It wasn't kids hopping a fence. It wasn't a storm blowing something loose. Somebody came prepared, and that somebody expected to come back out. Inside the main processing building, our flashlights swept over conveyor frames, empty hooks, stacked pallets, and old safety signs peeled to ghost white. The place smelled like damp wood and old grease, and the air had that heavy industrial stillness that makes you feel like you shouldn't breathe too loud. Rask tried his radio. Nothing. Leary tried hers. Nothing. Celia lifted her marine radio, spoke into it, and her voice went out clean. "Harbor Patrol to base," she said. A reply came back immediately, clear as day, and Leary's face tightened. "So it's just our radios," she said, "not hers." I didn't like that. Not in a building this big. Not with someone who already proved he could get close to my cruiser without being seen. We moved deeper, light slicing through dust and rain drip. My beam caught a small device on a shelf near a broken window, an antenna and a battery pack taped to it like a cheap science project. Rask stopped and stared. "Jammer," he said. "Cheap, but it'll do the job in here." Leary didn't touch it with bare hands. She pulled gloves from her pocket, shut the device off, and slipped it into an evidence bag like she was putting a snake in a jar. The second she did, my radio came back to life in a burst of dispatch chatter, then steadied. I keyed up and gave our location, and Leary asked for additional units, Coast Guard, and emergency medical. Hearing dispatch answer clean felt like a small patch of ground under my boots in a place that kept shifting. We worked the building the way you're trained to work large structures. Slow, deliberate, one line of sight at a time, no hero moves. The main floor had 2 big halls and a stairwell that led up to offices. On a desk near the stairwell, my light found wallets, 3 of them, spread open like someone emptied them in a hurry. 2 were tourist wallets, licenses, and credit cards exposed. 1 belonged to Trent Mayfield. Next to them sat a spiral notebook, not a diary, not a confession, just tide tables copied by hand with dates circled. Leary leaned closer, and her eyes moved fast. "He's planning around the water," she said. Rask took photos, bagged what we could without smearing anything, and Celia stayed near the entrance with the marine radio, keeping the boat hot like Leary asked. Celia looked steady, but her eyes kept flicking to dark corners and broken doorways, and I couldn't blame her. This wasn't a routine harbor problem anymore. This was the kind of scene that ends with lawsuits and funerals if you do it wrong. Leary made a call I didn't like, but I understood. "Mason, you're with me. Noah, check the upper offices. Celia, stay on the radio and keep the boat ready." Rask hesitated. "I don't like splitting." I don't either, Leary said. We're doing it because time matters. We keep talking. We keep moving. Rask went up the stairs slow, flashlight bouncing along ceiling beams. Leary and I pushed down a side corridor marked cold storage, the letters half peeled but still readable. The air felt different down there. Not colder, just heavier, like the walls held onto old work and old accidents. Halfway down, we found a steel door with a heavy latch and a padlock that looked newer than everything else around. Leary tried it, locked. Someone wanted this sealed, she said. I stood off to the side while she worked the latch with a pry bar from her belt kit. The lock snapped free with a sharp metallic pop that echoed down the hall, and for a second I expected an answer, a voice, something. There was nothing. We pulled the door open, our lights cutting into a small insulated room, a walk-in freezer that had long ago lost power but still held its shape like a coffin. Trent Mayfield lay on the floor face down, hands bound behind him with plastic ties. I'm not going to dress it up. He was gone. There was no movement, no breath, nothing that needed interpretation. Leary knelt, checked for any sign of life out of habit and duty, then shut her eyes for a beat like she was making herself stay functional. She stood and spoke into her radio, voice steady. Dispatch, we have one deceased male, possible pilot. We need detectives and medical. We are continuing to search for 2 missing tourists. A sound came from deeper in the corridor. Not a voice, not an animal, just movement where there shouldn't be movement, like a shoe scuffing on concrete. Leary and I turned our lights down the hall at the same time. A man stood at the far end, half behind a doorway. He held a long gun low, not raised, like he was deciding how he wanted this to go. Leary raised her pistol and spoke like she'd done it 1,000 times. Drop it. Hands where I can see them. He didn't talk. He stepped back and vanished into the doorway like he'd been swallowed by the building. Leary moved forward fast, but not reckless, and she pulled me with her in that tight professional way where you don't have to repeat instructions. Mason, stay on me, she said. We reached the doorway and found a maintenance room with 2 exits, one leading deeper into the building, one leading outside toward the shoreline. The outside door was ajar, rain blowing in through the gap, and I knew which way he'd gone before we even crossed the threshold. We pushed through, and the rain hit us again. The shoreline was a slope of mud and weeds down to the water, and the tide was low enough that the exposed muck looked like a wound. A small skiff sat pulled up on the bank with its fuel line hooked and its key in. The man was there, bent over the engine, trying to start it, shoulders hunched like he was irritated that his plan wasn't moving fast enough. Leary yelled, "Stop, now!" He swung the gun up. I fired first because I saw his barrel leveling at Leary's chest, and there are moments where you don't get to debate ethics in your head. My shot went wide in the rain. His shot didn't. Leary jerked hard and fell backward into the mud, her pistol flying from her hand and disappearing into weeds. I dropped to a knee beside her, my body instinctively trying to become a shield, even though I knew a rifle round doesn't care about intention. Leary's eyes were wide and angry, not scared. She grabbed my sleeve for a second, and the message was clear without words. Don't do something stupid. Don't leave her. Don't chase blind. The man ran along the bank toward the corner of the building, using the structure as cover. He didn't go far. He knew exactly where to disappear because this was his ground. I pressed my hand to Leary's uniform where the round hit and held pressure the way you're trained, the way you hope is enough. My radio felt too small in my hand when I keyed up. Dispatch, officer down. Officer down at the Gravina cannery shoreline. Send everyone. Leary's breathing went shallow. Her grip loosened. Rain kept coming like it had no part in any of it, just weather doing weather, and the normalcy of that made it worse. Celia's marine radio crackled behind me with bass confirming they were sending patrol and Coast Guard was launching. I looked up and saw Rask at the shoreline, eyes locked on the corner where the man vanished, jaw set in a way that told me he was already running the next steps in his head. We have to hold him, Rask said. We do it smart, I said, because my voice needed something to do besides shake. He wants us inside. We don't give him that. Celia called from near the dock. I can get you back on the boat. You can wait for backup. I shook my head, not because I wanted to play hero, but because the alternative felt like signing the tourist's death certificate ourselves. "They could still be alive," I said, and the words tasted wrong the moment they left my mouth. But saying them kept my hands steady. It gave me a reason that wasn't rage. Rask and I moved along the outside wall, staying out of windows, using corners as cover. We didn't call out. We didn't rush. We watched for movement, for a silhouette, for a shift in darkness that wasn't rain. At the far corner, we found another door propped open with scrap wood, fresh boot prints leading inside. Rask held up 2 fingers, then pointed to me, then the door, then himself. He wanted me on the first angle and him behind, and I nodded because there's comfort in clear roles when everything else is chaos. I slid in, pistol up, light low. The corridor inside ran parallel to the cold storage hall, and the air smelled like wet concrete and old fish oil. Someone had dragged a heavy metal cart across the floor, leaving deep lines in dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The cart sat ahead, angled like a barrier, and behind it the man waited like he'd been expecting us to use that door. He rose fast and fired. The round hit the cart and sent sparks, and the sound in that corridor was a hard crack that punched my ears. I dropped behind the wall edge, heart slamming, and forced myself not to fire blind. Blind fire is how you miss the threat and hit the wrong thing, and I wasn't going to add Celia's name to the night. I edged my light under the cart and saw his boots shift, weight moving left, like he was trying to reposition for a better angle. Rask came in behind me, calm as a clock. He tossed a small canister low, not a grenade, just a smoke can he carried for search work, and it clattered and hissed as it rolled. White smoke bloomed fast, thick and bright in our flashlight beams, and for a moment the corridor became a blank page. The man moved, trying to use the confusion. I caught a shape through haze and fired twice, controlled, the way the range drills you to do when your body wants to dump a whole magazine out of fear. He grunted and stumbled. He didn't fall. He ran, limping now, deeper into the building, leaving scuffs and a smear against the wall like a signature. Rask and I chased but kept space, not letting him pull us into a blind corner. We moved with our backs to walls, crossing openings quick, light sweeping, listening for the sound of breathing that didn't match ours. We reached a side office with a window blown out, and a rope ladder hung from it down to the outside like a planned escape route. He was already climbing down, one hand on the rope, the other keeping the gun angled back toward us. I moved to the window and aimed, but I saw his barrel swing, and I didn't want to take a shot that might carry through and hit Celia or ricochet off metal into something I couldn't see. Instead, I turned and sprinted for the main exit, taking the shortest haul I knew, boots hitting puddles, lungs burning cold. I burst outside and saw him running along the shoreline toward the skiff, his limp slowing him but not stopping him. Celia stood by the dock, piling with the marine radio in hand, eyes wide, and when she saw the gun, she froze for a split second like her brain didn't want to accept the image. "Get down!" I shouted. She dropped behind the piling as if the word yanked her. The man reached the skiff and tried to shove it into the water with one leg, but it didn't budge. The tide was too low. Mud held it like glue. He turned, gun up, trapped between muck and water, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. Middle-aged, unshaven, eyes flat with sleeplessness, the expression of someone who believes he's owed something. Rask stepped out from behind a support beam and aimed steady. "Drop it," he said. The man stared at us like we were the ones who didn't belong here. He raised the gun anyway. I fired once, center mass, because there was no other choice left that didn't cost another life. He fell into the mud and let the gun go. He tried to crawl for a second, then stopped moving, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had erupted. Backup arrived minutes later, lights cutting through rain, radios finally loud and constant. Officers secured the scene. Medical confirmed what we already knew about Leary and the man. Detectives searched the cannery until morning, methodical, angry, careful not to destroy what little evidence the rain hadn't already tried to erase. They found Evan Doyle and Rick Morrow in a second sealed room off the processing floor, bound and left where they couldn't breathe. They found more too, a local deckhand who vanished in August, a tourist who never made his ferry in September, names that had been whispered in bars and written off as people leaving town without telling anyone, because that's easier to accept than what the alternative looks like. The man's name was Ronan Sutter, 46. He'd done contract work on city docks years earlier, which explained how he knew where the cameras didn't reach and how he got close enough to my cruiser to touch the light bar switch without me seeing him. In his pockets and bag, they found plastic ties, 2 phones that weren't his, cash and bank cards, and a folded tide chart like the one we found on the desk. On it, he had circled October 19, 2016, and written one number beside it in blocky pen. 3. That number sat with me harder than the gunshots did because it made everything cold and planned and counted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was a schedule. We loaded Ronan Sutter into a body bag. We loaded Sergeant Dana Leary into another. When the first pale light showed over the water, my radio finally came through clean, and dispatch said my call sign the way she'd been saying it all night, like she was afraid to lose it again. I stood on the wet boards at berth 7 while they photographed the float plane and taped off the area, and I watched the harbor wake up like nothing had happened. Boats moved, engines started. A gull cried like it was annoyed by the weather. People drove to work. And in the middle of that normal morning, I kept seeing that single flash of my light bar in the rain, a tiny signal that told me someone had been close enough to touch my world and change it, quietly, with a fingertip. That's the part that stayed with me. Not the building, not the chase, not even the shots. The calm way it started, the deliberate way it was staged, and the fact that if I'd treated it like a routine harbor call the way it was dispatched, I would have walked right past the trap without ever knowing it was there until it closed.